we'll do the live thing first. Like. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time listening, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, please rate the podcast, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell, hit the notifications so you get to know when we drop a new video if you're watching on YouTube. If you ever wanted to let us know and you wanted to reach out to us and, suggest a new topic or ask a question or, you want to come on and be a guest, I can't wait to get you guys on, Devo and P-Diz and Paulie and everyone, I want to get you on, especially as things are going to start to open up, hopefully very soon. You can hit us up on our Twitter or Instagram at the Bigmark Podcast, at the Bigmark Pod, respectively. If you ever wanted to support the podcast, we have our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. We have a few different levels there you can kind of support. And, one of our biggest ways of spreading is just going to be word of mouth. So go tell a friend about us. We tell one of your cool friends, because that's who we want listening. No, I'm just joking. Like I said, if you tell one friend, we'll double the podcast overnight. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. I love doing these episodes for you. And when I was thinking about doing an episode tonight, I was like, obviously, I love doing these solo ones with me and you. And it kind of allows me to get into a little bit more topics that I really enjoy. And, I've talked about movies. I've talked about actors and comedians and everything like that. And tonight I wanted to talk about one of my favorite TV shows of all time. And it's called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I guess I'll drop a spoiler alert right now. If you've never seen the show, please go watch it. I guess I'm gonna reveal a few things. It's not necessarily gonna ruin the show. I guess it's a show that potentially could be ruined. It is a serial show, so the episodes do bleed into each other, and I guess each episode is somewhat connected eventually. Some of the early episodes, not so much. But like I said, if you've never watched the show, it's one of my favorite shows. Again, when I was kind of thinking about this and almost looking back and almost analyzing some of the shows that I like, a lot of the shows have characters that, even Seinfeld, which is one of my favorite shows, they have characters which you might not necessarily like if you ever met them in real life. And I think that's a really interesting thing about, why people watch TV and all that stuff. But, I've talked about Tony Soprano and The Sopranos and all that stuff, where it's like, it's almost like you get to see a little bit of a mirror there. And I guess if you're talking to Carl Jung, it's a little bit of that shadow where you kind of see where, I think it's Stolitshnitz says, the line between good and evil doesn't run, between countries. It runs down the heart of every man. So every person in the world, has that dividing line of good and evil between them. And in real life, no one ever wants to feed that kind of side of the darkness. But if you can watch TV and it can be cathartic and you can read literature and you can do all that stuff, maybe you can kind of, deal with that in a healthy way. Well, hopefully anyway. So anyway, It's Always Sunny is probably one of the most prime examples of having characters in a show that you'll probably never want to meet in real life. The characters are all nuts. They're all, they run the gamut from sociopathic to psychopathic almost to lazy to, it's like almost like all the vices and all the deadly sins are almost represented with these guys. So It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, sometimes abbreviated to It's Always Sunny, or simply Sunny, is an American sitcom that premiered on FX on August 4th, 2005. It was created by friends Rob McElhenney, who developed it with his with Glenn Howerton, and it is executive produced and primarily written by McElhenney, Howerton, and their other friend Charlie Day. The series follows the gang, a group of 5 misfit friends, twins Dennis, who's played by Glenn Howerton, and Deandra Sweet D. Reynolds, who's played by Caitlin Olsen, who is actually married to Rob McElhenney. Their friends Charlie Kelly, who's played by Charlie Day, and Ronald Mac McDonald, which everyone calls him Mac, who's played by Rob McElhenney. And from season 2 onward, Frank Reynolds, who's played by Danny DeVito, who is Dennis and Dee's legal father. The gang runs the fictional Paddy's Pub, an unsuccessful Irish bar in South Philly. Essentially, when the guys were kind of starting to write the show, they were trying to imagine, how are we going to get all these guys to be able to be hanging around together all in the same place. Like, you look at Friends, you look at Seinfeld and stuff, all these people, like, did they have fucking jobs? Like, yeah, I guess on Friends they showed scenes with some of these people at work, but most of the time they're sitting in a fucking coffee shop, they're sitting in their own apartments. I guess Seinfeld kind of made sense because Jerry was a stand-up, so obviously he's got a flexible schedule during the day. Kramer has no fucking job, and then I guess so anyway, as a writer, you obviously have to think about this and be like, well, how are we going to get all these characters to be fucking hanging out, except by making them live together, which countless shows do that whole thing. So anyway, they chose a bar. They chose to run a bar because they could all be working there, and then essentially they could kind of fucking close the doors and go and do whatever they want, which they do all the time. So that's kind of why they went with the pub aesthetic anyway. Each member of the gang displays unethical behavior and traits such as excessive drinking and substance abuse, dishonesty, cruelty, selfishness, and egotism. So that's what I was mentioning before, right? Like, all these, like, they're just characters that are displaying the worst parts of being human. Some people kind of describe it as like Seinfeld on crack. The Seinfeld characters are already not the most likable characters in the world, and these guys are just wild. The episodes of It's Always Sunny usually find the gang hatching elaborate schemes and often conspiring against one another and others for personal gain, vengeance, or simply the entertainment of watching another's downfall. The old, what is that, Schadenfreude? Anyway, everything they do results in contention amongst themselves, and much of the show's dialogue involves the characters arguing and yelling at one another. Some people actually describe the show, especially when it first came on TV, as it's just the show is just people yelling at each other. And I've had a lot of people I know, they've said that they've tried to watch it, but they just can't handle the yelling. So once you get past that, it's such a hilarious show. Despite their lack of success or achievements in life, the gang maintains high opinions of themselves and displays an obsessive interest in their reputations and public images. So they're always doing shit. Again, they have that vanity about them. Basically, each character more or less is trying to prove themselves in one way or another and avoid embarrassment. And in doing so, basically getting embarrassed all the time. The gang has no sense of shame when attempting to get what they want and often engage in activities that others would find humiliating, disgusting, or shocking. Some of these situations include becoming addicted to crack cocaine and pretending to be mentally challenged in order to qualify for welfare, attempted cannibalism, kidnapping, blackface, hidden naked inside a couch in order to eavesdrop on people, tricking a man into giving his daughter a lap dance, forcing each other to eat inedible items, huffing paint, foraging naked in the sewers for rings and coins, impersonating police officers in order to get free goods and extort civilians, sleeping with each other's romantic interests, seducing a priest, secretly feeding someone their dead pet, plugging their open wounds with trash, grave robbing, setting a room of people on fire, and locking the door to avoid an uncomfortable Thanksgiving meal, stalking their crushes, fantasizing about killing each other, taking out life insurance on a suicidal person, orally siphoning gasoline, and pretending to have AIDS in order to get priority access to water park rides, among many other scenarios. So needless to say, again, like I said, the show is just fucking going off the hook here. And it's a wild ride. And again, there's something special. Basically, as much as this subject matter might even be off-putting to someone who's never watched the show and is listening to this, I'm assuming you've watched the show. If you're going to see this, you're going to see the fucking title, It's Always Sunny, and hopefully click on it and say, hey, this guy's going to talk about Sunny. So you've probably seen the show, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Again, these situations are hilarious because you'd hope you'd never find yourself within any of them. And I think there's an X factor, there's a certain charm, there's a certain special feeling about the show because Rob, Glenn, and Charlie are friends. They actually all met each other while struggling to find gigs in Los Angeles. And the show actually came out of a short film idea written by McElhenney and Howerton, where a friend came over to another friend's house to get sugar, and the friend tells him he has cancer, and all the guy can think about is getting his sugar and getting out of there. They actually kind of do that, like this was that was in the pilot that they called It's Always Sunny on TV, and it was shot on a digital camcorder and filmed in the actors' own apartments in 2005. So this was like just before the show got picked up. It was kind of what they used to again, it used as a pilot. But again, with the boys all being friends, I think that chemistry not only shows on film, I think that's really important, is that the chemistry between the three guys, but there's also Caitlin Olsen, there's also Danny DeVito, a part of the gang. And, they all have that chemistry together that I think is going to be, the most, that's going to come across on screen. Let's put it that way. You're going to see that, but also they're so involved in the writing of the show too, that chemistry just really clicks there in the writing as well. And I think, the show kind of starts in a certain way and it takes a couple turns here and there. And then it starts kind of catching wind and really, making its strides, a couple seasons in. And I'll actually mention kind of how that works. But, the show's been on, it's actually entering its 15th season. They began filming in May 2021 and wrapped in October. So right now, as we speak, it's January 18th. The 15th season is actually currently on TV, which is super cool. But 15 seasons, my God. But on April 1st, a couple years ago, on April 1st, 2016, the series was renewed for a 13th and 14th season, which matched the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet with the most seasons for a live-action sitcom in American television history. So we're talking 14. So I guess they broke that record. So, fuck, that's crazy. I guess The Simpsons are an animated series, but, live-action sitcom. So, wow, 15 seasons. So, again, it's interesting. Before I kind of get into a little bit my personal story, the 15 seasons of a show is a lot of fucking seasons. I mentioned Seinfeld before, which is one of my favorite shows, which I'm going to do a podcast on later. They kind of left at 9, and essentially they were at their peak at 9. But I think even 9 is almost excessive for shows. When you have so many seasons in a show, yeah, there's many concepts and there's many situations, and you look at The Simpsons, you look at South Park, which are able to do really topical, topical episodes, and the subject matter is right there, and it's fresh and it's brand new. I mean, it's also animated, so you can create the shows a lot easier. I think sometimes the magic can get lost. You even look at Trailer Park Boys. After season 7, there was some personnel changes in the production departments, and that really changed the look and feel of the show. And they kept pushing it, and they keep pushing it. Now it's a cartoon. There is a tipping point, I think, with any show, with anything really, that like unless you're coming out with something drastically new, which don't get me wrong, the new episodes of It's Always Sunny are super fresh. The way that they've approached things, they've done episodes in new ways, and I think, Rob, Glenn, and Charlie really do think about keeping it fresh and doing things in a new way. But it's still the same characters, they're getting older, they're doing all that stuff where it's almost like Larry David, one of the co-creators of Seinfeld, one of the biggest things he never ever wanted to do was a reunion show. Because usually you do it 10 years after the characters are all aged, it looks all weird, it's all different. That goes along with the idea that we preserve these characters in our mind in a way. And I think that's that just is another point for me, another point of contention as far as not allowing a show to go too far and not allowing it to outrun itself, I guess. Go dry. I don't know the thing is, that's the problem, is that even if a show is good, I think it just gets too old, I guess, is what I'm saying at the end of the day. Some of the best shows, like, I know it's a sketch comedy show, but one of the best shows of all time is Dave Chappelle's show. 2 seasons, 2.5 if you kind of count the lost season. Again, it's almost like you got to. It's quality over quantity. The never-ending struggle, as they say. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Anyway, thanks for listening. Patreon.com/BigMarkPod. Personal. So. My fucking personal story, I'm just reading my notes here like a goon. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how I was even introduced to the show. So, I guess it would have been around 2012, 2011. I was in university. I was living in probably 2012, actually, by this point. I was living in my house on Coombs, 420 Coombs. Shout out, boys. Shout out, Benny. Shout out, Linny. Shout out, Lep. Shout out Clinty, shout out Danny Purse. How you doing, brother? But my buddy Lep, my brother Lep, was super into the show. He kept talking about the show, man. It's Always Sunny, blah, blah, blah. You've ever watched it? You ever seen it? So, and this is, like I said, 2012. So at this point, I think we were already pushing, I guess that would have been like season 6 or 7. Depending on how I think it's a season per year. Anyway, so the show was already cooking with gas by that point. And Lep was like, I believe he chose an episode that he had just watched, or it was like on the season that he was watching. And it's funny because the first time I ever watched it, he chose the episode The Gang Goes to the Jersey Shore. So for everyone who's listening who has seen that episode, you might be kind of wondering, if that was the best choice for the first episode I should ever watch. And it was funny, even Lep was kind of saying, I don't know if this is the best choice, but this is what we're watching. It's just, it's honestly, maybe I take that back. It's not the best choice, and it's also the best choice at the same time. So the reason I say that is the reason why it's not the best and it is the best is the same fucking answer. It's pure chaos, and it's a good example because it's basically the perfect showcase of what the show is. Absolutely wild behavior. Things are fucking going nuts. Everyone's doing wild shit, but without any backstory for the show, it kind of tripped me out a little bit, because there was a couple jokes in the episode too that definitely would have been funnier if I'd seen the show before. And, on that note, I'm not exactly sure what episode, you can always just start with number 1. It's probably the best. It's the safest. The first season of It's Always Sunny is not necessarily the best indication of what the show does become, but it's really interesting, and it is a nice progression. And I believe the boys, when they're writing, they do have that idea a little bit, at least when they got to us as they write, as things go. They have that idea of that progression of where the characters did come from. But again, it was a wild ride for my first episode. Thank you, Lep, my brother. I don't know if I would have got it into the show if it wasn't for you, but because of that, even though it was a bombardment of It's Always Sunny, I fell in love with it nonetheless, and started at 1 and got after it. And, I thought I'd just mention a couple of my favorite episodes anyway. One of my favorite episodes is The Gang Gets Held Hostage from season 3. Again, like I said, if you've made it this far in the podcast, spoiler alert or whatever, but it's the episode where the gang gets held hostage by the McPoyles. I think that's the first time we see the McPoyles. Actually, no, it's another time where Mac bangs his sister. But anyway, so the McPoyles come in, and there's like Stockholm syndrome going on. The whole story is kind of a trip. There's there's Die Hard references in it. Everyone is just amazing. It's just one of my favorite episodes. The Nightman Cometh from season 4, particularly good season. It's the season finale, I should say, and it's basically a musical number. Charlie writes a musical for his love interest, the waitress, and puts it on with the gang, and it's just hilarious. What's another one here? Just another one here. The Gang Gets Analyzed. Amazing episode. Oh my God. That's almost an episode where I feel like it's in the same boat as the Jersey Shore one, where if you showed that to someone as the first episode that they had, that if they've never seen any other episodes, a lot of jokes might not necessarily land because it's just so out of context. But it's in season 8, so if you do watch the show chronologically up to that point, totally makes sense. The gang goes and goes to see a therapist, and everyone talks to them. Everyone talks to this one therapist, and she just kind of cracks everyone open and cleans them out. And Frank just is amazing in it. He has this crazy backstory of him as a child in a mental institution that comes up, and it's just brilliant. But those are just a few examples anyway of some of the ones I like. But when I was talking about The Nightman Cometh, it reminded me of this one thing. The Nightman Cometh is the season finale of season 4 of It's Always Sunny. And when I was thinking about that episode, I was also thinking about the rest of the season. And it's like, season 4 is so good, and I have a theory about season 4 of many shows. They tend to be my favorite seasons. If you're going to look at a show and pick your favorite season of a show, they tend to be my favorite seasons of shows. I don't know if it's just like a timing thing. The writers and the actors and everyone just start to click at that point potentially. But Trailer Park Boys season 4, The Office season 4, obviously It's Always Sunny season 4. Many. Again, the list goes on and on. Sopranos season 4. There's just so many dramas, comedies, all these different series. All these different mooses. Anyway, shut up, Benny. But I always think season 4 is just the best, and I think it's just, again, it's that perfect storm of the writers and the actors and the people making the show are just all clicking. is maybe less pressure. You know, if the show's been on TV for that long, they've probably made, you know, a little bit of money that they're not necessarily struggling and worrying about if the show gets canceled, what are they going to do? So maybe the artists start to take a little bit more liberties or you know, just try and take some, you know, go down some new avenues. Again, just really interesting. I'd love to hear what everyone thinks about that, the season 4 theory. One of the other funny, it's one of the more interesting things about a TV show where I guess it's breaking the fourth wall in a way, where the interest is not only on the character in the show, but what's happening to the actor who's playing that character. So we all love Christian Bale. We all love him. He puts on the weight. He takes off the weight. He eats cans of tuna and fucking apples and is 100 pounds. And then he does the juice and he's Batman. We love it. Rob McElhenney from It's Always Sunny, our trusty pal Mac, fucking basically did the same thing. All for this show in the same character. So Mac, the character Mac, I should say, suffers from body dysmorphia, which is a psychological syndrome disorder that essentially when you look in the mirror, you don't really see the body that you have. Something is wrong in your mind, that even if you're skinny or even if you're in really good shape, you're going to look at yourself in the mirror and you're either going to perceive yourself as somehow not in that shape. It might not even actually have anything to do with shape and fitness. It's more so just this thought that, you know, you can look at yourself and you know, you might be a perfectly attractive person, but if you look in the mirror and you see this ugly person, there's this disconnect in the brain, without going too far into it, of course. So Max suffers from this, and he's been depicted at various weights throughout the course of the series, like I mentioned. Prior to the beginning of season 7, he gained 60 pounds. This is Mac, and the actor Rob McElhenney gained 60 pounds, and then Mac, the character, was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And when Mac finally returned to a healthy weight, he admitted he missed supposedly coming across as scary to people, which is actually in the gang gets analyzed. And by the time season 13 arrived, he is noticeably ripped and physically stronger. So Mac, the character, is always talking about being badass and loving, you know, being ripped and stuff. And it's funny, throughout the course of the show, Mac kind of slowly turns gay, which when you watch the show from the beginning, it's not necessarily blatant cues that the character is gay. It seems like he's straight, but by the end of it, he's gay, which is, you know, it is what it is, but it's just how the characters write it, because, and it's a funny element because Mac is in the closet and he's always trying to pretend that he's not gay. And the rest of the gang is totally cool. They're in fact usually encouraging him to come out of the closet, but he goes to great lengths to prevent people from finding that out. He eventually does come out and it's awesome, but this whole weight gain thing is kind of a part of it. And at one point in the show, again, no spoilers, but or spoiler alert, I should say. Basically, at some point, Mac talks about, you know, cultivating mass, aka just eating fucking burritos out of a bag. And then that's how he's gonna get super ripped. Is that, you know, when Michelangelo sculpted the sculpture of David, he started with a giant slab of marble. So that's his whole idea, that he wants to start as a giant slab and then kind of chip away at it, which is hilarious. But again, you know, I think that whole dedication to your craft and seeing that, you know, everyone shouts out Christian Bale, but, you know, Rob McElhenney is doing it too, which is, I think, super, super wild. Another interesting thing, you know, which I wanted to mention during this podcast, which I've thought about for years since I've been watching the show and since these episodes first came out in 2013. So at this point, I'd been watching the show. And at the same time, it was on FX, which is basically like Fox's subsidiary network. It kind of has more like wild shows. You can swear on them. You can kind of do whatever you want. There's Fox XX too, or FXX, I should say. And they're just more like kind of racier networks. And at the same time, It's Always Sunny was on TV. There was another show called The League. I don't know if anyone's seen The League. Again, I'm sure if you've seen It's Always Sunny, you've probably at least heard of it. Really good show. I liked it a lot. It's about like a fantasy football league, all these buddies. And they do wild shit. Really funny show. Very similar dynamic to It's Always Sunny. I believe it's 4 guys and a girl, just kind of that same idea. I don't know how much the actors know each other, or the creators of the show know each other. It's not like they're the same creators, because obviously It's Always Sunny is Rob, Charlie, and Glenn. But there's always just been kind of similarities there. You know, jocular, kind of, you know, university age-ish, mid 20s to 40s kind of humor. Like I said, there's some similarities in the humor, but on October 23rd, 2013, there was a little bit more than just similarities in the humor. So on that night, It's Always Sunny released their episode called Flowers for Charlie. Now the whole Flowers for Charlie thing is a play on is wordplay, is a play on the play Flowers for Agamemnon, or I guess it's a story. But there's this story called Flowers for Agamemnon, and it essentially chronicles the tale of this dude who wasn't necessarily very smart, and he was given the power of being really intelligent, and just kind of like all kinds of things happen from there. So the story of Flowers for Charlie follows this exact plot, that Charlie is basically given intelligence pills to make him smart. He's given these pills. He gets extremely intelligent to him, but it causes him debilitating pain. He ends up in a wheelchair by the end of it, but he's this genius. It turns out at the end, again, spoiler alert, it turns out at the end that he wasn't smart. It was a placebo, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, he told the waitress off. He was, you know, being mean to Frank and being mean and just acting like he's so intelligent that he's better than everybody. The same night, October 23rd, 2013, The League released an episode called Flowers for Taco. Now, Taco is the character on The League, which is this kind of dumbass wild card character, very similar to Charlie's character. Exact same plot. Taco starts smoke. I think he stops smoking weed, I think is what happens, which is funny, but he stops smoking weed and then he becomes super intelligent and everyone's like, what the fuck? And then they get him to smoke weed by the end of it because they're like, he's throwing off the dynamic of the crew. Really interesting. I can't get down to the premise of this. Boys, Rob, Charlie, Glenn, I know you're listening. Let me know. No, but it's just, I don't know if I'll ever get to the bottom of it, but let me know what you guys think too. Like I said, hit me up, and let me know what you think, because it's a really interesting similarity. Why did it come on the same night? I don't know, man. They had to have some type of connection to each other, but really interesting. You know, one of the last things I'll leave you with here is on November 9th, 2021. So last November, Glenn, Charlie, and Rob started the Always Sunny podcast, which is an episode by episode recap of the show, which is really interesting. I've been listening to the podcast. It's what got me kind of, you know, back into rewatching the show. Don't get me wrong. I've rewatched the show a million times, but listening to their podcast has been tremendous. Really interesting insights into, you know, the making of the show. To be honest, they kind of just end up talking about all kinds of stuff. It's not necessarily a really guided podcast, but super funny. And listening to the guys, again, like I mentioned before, you just hear that chemistry that I talked about. it just comes out with these boys, and it's really, really interesting to hear. And, you know, it's interesting. It's part of this. It's not necessarily ahead of the wave anyway, because there's been a lot of these other podcasts that have been out for a little bit longer. But a lot of these podcasts about shows with the actors or people who are actually involved in the show running the podcast, I think it's super interesting. Like Talking Sopranos. I think I mentioned that when I did the Sopranos episode. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and check it out. Super cool. That's with Michael Imperioli and Steve Sciarippa, who were characters on The Sopranos. Michael Imperioli was Christopher Moltisanti, and Steve Sciarippa was Bobby Bacala. Amazing characters, amazing actors, but they tend to be pretty strict as far as talking about the episodes. They talk a lot about the acting chops and the direction and the different choices that were made by the writers. Very informative podcast, really cool. There's the Office Ladies, which is Pam and Angela from The Office. Those two girls, obviously characters from the show, Pam and Angela, go over the episodes episode by episode, and they kind of shoot the shit. I haven't really listened to theirs as much, but again, that episodic kind of going over it's the same as Office Deep Dive. It's another Office podcast with Kevin from The Office. And again, it's very interesting having a character or a person from the show do the podcast, right? And then This Is Important, which is kind of more of a hybrid. It's almost a little bit closer to the Always Sunny podcast, where it's actually all the guys from the Workaholics crew. So Workaholics is a group of 4 buddies, very similar to Rob, Charlie, and Glenn. But they wrote the show Workaholics, and they have a podcast too, but they seem to kind of talk about whatever. It's not necessarily just about the show Workaholics. And it's really interesting, you know, these podcasts about shows where, you know, it's almost like I'm the kind of guy that's going to do a rewatch. I'm going to rewatch a show. I'm going to rewatch a movie. But there's a lot of people who don't necessarily do that. And I think a lot of these podcasts are gonna kind of I don't know if it's necessarily a matter of convincing, but it's gonna give a lot of people the idea to rewatch some of these shows, because they obviously talk about it a lot in the podcast. And when you're kind of going episode by episode, it's really fun to watch the episode and then listen to the podcast. And I think that kind of nails a little bit why I like to rewatch shows, because there's a lot of things you miss, especially when shows used to just be on TV and you've only watched it once. You know, now we have the technology and streaming services and stuff that we can go back and we can watch these shows, and we can kind of say, hey, you know, like there's all these little cool things that we missed. And then with this information, with people who are actually involved in making these movies or TV shows, you know, they can actually give us some insight and give us some actual information about kind of what happened behind the scenes stuff. Really, you know, kind of exclusive access, if you will, but again, in that conversational form. And obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you love podcasts, but I think the thing is with a podcast, it gives you that long form. It gives you that opportunity to kind of talk out some of these ideas, answer some questions that maybe a lot of people have. Like I said, you know, this podcast gives everyone who's listening, everyone who can hear the sound of my voice right now, has the opportunity to reach out to me and talk to me about anything I've said, whether it would be stupid or whether it be something that you loved. And a lot of you have, and I thank you so much, and continue to do it. But like I said, you know, these podcasts give us this chance to potentially, you know, get a little bit closer to these artists or these filmmakers and television writers and all these people who sometimes go kind of, you know, behind the scenes, literally. You know, we might know a lot of writers by name, but a lot of writers we might not even know what they look like. So I think a lot of these podcasts are really exposing the awesome people that are behind a lot of these shows and what really makes them tick. And again, you know, it's obviously deconstructive, but it gives us a chance to kind of go back on things and say, you know, what really works there. And whether you're a filmmaker or whether you're any type of artist, it can kind of give you a little bit of that insight and hopefully provide you with a little bit of inspiration to keep creating. I know it does for me. And, you know, there's so many movies and television shows that have such amazing subject matter that can be so influential on an artist like myself. And like I said, I encourage you to go and you know, look up some of your favorite shows. I'm sure there's a podcast out there. You know, like I said, I don't like to keep things too rigorous here as far as topics, so I'm all over the place, but I'm sure that there's a podcast out there that its sole purpose is to cover that topic that you really want to hear. So go out there, check it out. Podcasts about shows, podcasts about podcasts are next. Don't worry, that's going to be me. I'm going to be starting that podcast about podcasts. No, but anyway, thank you so much for listening. It's always sunny, baby. Go check it out. You know, like I always say, you know, tell a friend. If you tell one friend, we'll double the podcast overnight. Hit that bell, smash that like button, hit the subscribes, rate the podcast if you can, wherever you're listening. And if you ever wanted to donate to the podcast, go check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Thank you so much to our new subscribers on there. We love you so much. We appreciate your support. And, you know, get out there and go get some rum ham. We love you. Doot. Peace.